This is AV SuperFriends Off the Rails, an almost regularly scheduled open discussion on audio and video in higher education. We'll sound off about our most brilliant ideas, our dumbest mistakes, and everything in between. And because this conversation will almost certainly go off the rails at some point, we'll end up covering just about everything else. And now, the AV SuperFriends. For February 4th, 2022, it's the AV SuperFriends Off the Rails. Welcome back, everybody. Time for another Friday afternoon podcast adventure. Hope it's Friday afternoon where you are, because it's Friday afternoon where I am, and that's all I really care about.
It is here.
It's okay, Mark confirms it is
right
Friday
here.
Afternoon. We are good.
Down here. Yep.
All right. So at least two of us have Friday afternoon happening right now on Friday afternoon. My name is Chris Dector. I'm joined today by Justin, Jamie, and Mark, and that's it. Smaller show today due to conflicts and other things, but we're going to carry on anyway because it's Friday. On today's show, we're going to go over the various methods for integrating cameras and PCs into your AV systems and all the jazz involved in that. We're going to talk about some equipment selections that have withstood the test of time. But first, let's do the news.
The news.
So, this article comes from Yahoo News, but you probably saw it everywhere this week, and you may have not paid it much attention, or maybe you have. Those of you who know, we're probably pretty excited about this, and two of us have used this product and like it very much, and are wondering, what does this portend for the future? So, title of the article is Kramer acquires UC Workspace in strategic move to expand the boundaries of collaboration. Ignoring that last part of that headline, I think Kramer acquiring UC Workspace is the interesting part of that article, or that headline. So for those of you who don't know, UC Workspace is the company that makes, you probably have seen it. It gets bundled by Intel and others quite a bit. It's a product called Quicklaunch, and it is basically a unified interface launcher, a skin, I guess, for your various software-based platforms. You see it a lot of times in proposed huddle spaces and things like that. So it gives you big icons and things that can tie into scheduling systems and whatnot. So if I want that space to run Zoom or Teams or Google Hangout, or just I want to open up Microsoft Office or connect to Canvas, it will do it because it gives you a big full screen launcher to application launcher, and kind of gives you a customizable and unified interface for whatever people might be doing on those spaces. So Mark, you and I first deployed this, probably 6 years ago now, 5 years ago?
One forever ago. Yeah, we did this.
And really like it as a concept. It was clunky from the deployment side, from like the getting it to work with the actual endpoint deployments through SCCM and all that fun stuff. It had some issues related to that, user level permissions and whatnot. But I think it holds a lot of potential to have something like this, giving a very simplified interface to a PC. I think most of us probably deploy PCs now and just be like, "There's the login screen, Windows or Mac, wild. Do your thing." Yeah. But that I think we can do better. So I like the idea of this product, and I'm hopeful that with Kramer picking up the company, we'll start to see more of this get pushed through various products.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like when we did it, we kind of took that perspective of let's be really intentional with what we want clients to be able to do at this terminal, right? It's not the Wild West. Go ahead and browse your way to the latest and greatest virus and put it on this machine. Like it's not that, right? And it's you're actually removing some of the computer-ishness, if that's the word we want to use today, of the solution, because you're saying, no, if you find yourself in front of this workstation, you're doing these things, and I'm going to make it so you can only be exposed to these things. And so you kind of effectively remove that desktop experience, right? And so, but you can still have all the horsepower you need underneath the hood for your computer, your NUC, whatever you're going to run on there. But you're only getting clients to the portal they need to have access to, not necessarily everything they want to do that they may or may not be doing or should be doing at your location. So we kind of did our configuration where it was very much around a collaborative huddle space, like you mentioned, Chris, where it was kind of, these are the portals and things we want you to be able to do in here. This isn't for like watching Netflix and things like that in here. That's not what this does, and therefore you're not going to go there. So I can see the Swiss Army knife in this, and I think it is interesting to see like Kramer go ahead and go out there and do this, because I think maybe they have a parallel thought of kind of like, how can we use this to add intentionality to our offering?
So you said configuration. Is that configuration and or programming? Is there any programming behind any of that, or is it
it's just checkboxes?
Yeah, okay,
Windows application.
Yeah,
not that kind of configuration.
I think it has more to do with their collaboration lineup, that VIA lineup, because they have a front end to that, and it's usable but not the most elegant. If that makes sense. It's also
very customizable. So like the VIA basically just kind of kicks you loose and being like, hey, build what you want. And it's like, but there's an advantage to having some boundaries. Like you only get big pictures and icons because people are reading that stuff from distance as they connect. So
yeah, and I know they have a little menu bar, and like I said, it's functional but clunky. And I think this is what they were missing to really take full feature of their little boxes, because their little connects are, you can now get an HDMI input into them, but how do you select it? Well, right now you have to get onto your device and then go to the thing, and then unless it's a touch screen, and then you can touch in the certain area, but maybe if you know about it. And so it makes sense. Really, I mean, it will marry in nicely with what they're trying to do. I do wonder if they're going to remove it I'm not a strong enough Windows user to know, is Microsoft putting this kind of thing on their own, into their own Windows product with 11?
Not even up Windows 11. I mean, Windows 11, there is that that tablet mode, which has been around since like Windows 8, which does similar things, but it's not the same.
Yeah, I thought they were trying this tile thing. I don't know. I maybe no shock to people, but I use mostly Apple computers, so I just don't dig into it that deep, and I don't care. But I wonder if this takes that product away from being deployable as a solution for all these folks that were doing it before. I don't know.
I don't think that's no. I think you hit the nail on the head. It has to do with their VIA line. That's my guess, but
I think it is. But I think it also there's that segment that we're like I've always been asking. It's like, where is my enterprise version of the equivalent of the Apple TV for my classroom? I don't need a full desktop experience. I need to be able to do these 4 or 5 applications really
there's
well.
Many fine products by the folks at Cisco who would like to talk to you about their $7,000 boxes that do the same thing as your $600 computer.
But this thing, we can. If you looked at the machine we ran that on, it looks a whole hell of a lot like this VIA box. I'll tell you that right now, as far as like what it actually does. But does it give you that level of simple drag and drop lockdown feature set where you're like, yes, I can leverage a full-fledged computer that my IT department can manage from the back, but deploy it in an appliance mode so that you're not having access to all of these types of services that inherently bring risk to the organization, right? So you're saying, no, we're not going to do that. This is going to give you the appliance Swiss Army knife to let you deliver just the services you need.
Yeah. It's an interesting perspective, because that would be of value to say, okay, I can get a $500 PC that all it does is that sharing, screen driving system. As soon as that hits the network, SCCM picks it up, it dumps the newest updates and security patches, and then it loads this with the customized interface, and that's all you ever get. I mean, that's just a highly customizable endpoint deployment. That's an interesting model. Yeah. And they may do that. I think the magic sauce with the VIA boxes is they are basically, some of them anyway, they are basically little Linux PCs that have full-fledged interfaces on them. But they give you kind of that wrapper over top of it to kind of streamline that. So I see this as a play to say exactly what you're saying, but from the other direction. Instead of being like, we're going to deploy this on Windows, it'll probably still exist for Windows, because that would only make sense. And here's a version for Linux that automatically shows up on our little boxes. So maybe that is starting to move towards that idea of that enterprise version of an Apple TV. Simply, I just plug this in, it pulls its updates, it's Linux, it's good to go, and it's got this nice interface, and I make a couple of configs, it pulls that off the network, and away we're done. So
yeah, it's like what services do you need to do in whatever space you're putting this in, and like just limit it down to that. Anything advanced, it's BYOD. You run it off your own stuff, and we're doing our thing right here.
And I think the irony is we're almost seeing that now with just standard PCs that we deploy. And we talked about this years ago, and we talked about even removing PCs from the room because we were looking at what people actually did. It's like they're just connecting to a web browser to load Canvas or YouTube, or now these days and run Zoom. So there's probably like a half dozen things that everybody does. And outside of that is like that 3%. And you're exactly right. You could say, if I can find a solution to deploy this securely and easily and automatically that only does those 6 things, and anything beyond that, bring a laptop, do whatever you want. That's a viable model, I think. I don't know if we're there yet, or I just haven't had enough time to dig into that and see how that might work, but I still like that concept.
Yeah, I mean, we may be reading the tea leaves a little bit weird for this, maybe much simpler to that from their perspective. But I mean, maybe we're wishful thinking
about cancel the whole thing.
Well, yeah. And I think it is the more simplified version. This is the same reason they bought Wild Vision and to create this Kramer Via. And I think this is just their, well, we could develop this our own or buy them.
Yeah.
And they decided to go with the buy them.
That's literally called a make-buy decision in industry parlance. You know, do we make our own or just buy that company already makes it and then just integrate them, sort of thing. So
get rid of everything successful and just keep the.
If nothing else, I like this acquisition because I think Quicklaunch, UC Workspace. I want to call them by their product name, but I think they have a cool product that is not marketed as heavily or as well as it could be, and having Kramer get behind that means I think if nothing else, we'll see it get pushed around a lot more as a viable alternative. Now, whether they simply take what exists now, like you said, Jamie, we can build our own, just buy this, and just, now it's Quicklaunch by Kramer, or do we see that show up in other products in the future? And that would take some time. That would obviously be, we'll not see that for a year or two, but I don't know. I just like this. If things like this show up more often, because right now you go into a conference room here, you log in, it's just a Windows desktop because you logged in as you, and that's the only way to really. And
then you're searching for everything, and I think that's what's becoming frustrating to folks is that you have to. If you open up the menu bar, right, you get 400 of the default Microsoft apps, and then the 3 that you want, and this just gives you the quick tiles. Just get to it. Let's get moving.
Exactly.
Most people just don't give two craps about the rest of it.
Exactly. So yeah, no, it's clever. If you haven't played with it, go out and play with it. Because I think it may change the way you think about kind of deploying that application layer stuff in your learning space and what you do and do not actually need.
Yeah. I wonder. They've got a trial available. Yeah.
You do a 30-day free trial.
Justin's running it right now.
I'm downloading right now.
Going to install it on the fly.
We'll hear it when it happens.
I'll build it, and I'll give a review at the end of the show.
All right, you heard it here.
We took a real serious look at it, but it's worth looking.
Well, and we even talked about it, at IU, same sort of thing from the standpoint of we had certain departments saying we want to standardize on Teams for all our administrative meetings, and other ones like, look, we're just using Zoom everywhere already for classes. We're just going to keep using Zoom, and that was kind of the compromise of. I don't want to build Zoom rooms, and I don't want to build Microsoft Teams rooms because now we're back to that same old issue of. Now we're back to that same old issue of. No, you can do that in this room, but not that room. Yeah. But this sort of thing gives that application layer of, can I get a simplified interface that works for anything, but still provide the full flexibility? So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of flexibility, so. We're going to jump right into our first segment here, and we're going to skip this break, and we'll tell the advertisers no.
We're saving you all some headache.
Saving you some annoyances here. But so for our first segment here, we're going to talk about, I've got the label on our sheet here. I'm called it Design My Space. This is something that I've been haranguing all the other Super Friends individually and on meetings about. Just trying to get everyone's feedback because I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to go with this, and it's a challenge for various reasons. And what we're talking about is adding cameras to your classroom spaces in a full commercial AV environment.
There's this company.
Those who are listening right now are going,
named after a bird, a kind of bird, I think.
You're just saying this is dumb because everyone does it. What's the problem? Just plug your cameras in. And what I'm talking about is physically installing the cameras is not the problem. It's selecting the cameras and selecting the transport. And most importantly, it's selecting that with the idea of that last inch between the cameras and the PCs. How do you best manage that? And right now it's kind of that challenge of, well, I can just run a standard baseband, camera, HDMI or SDI, and I run a little converter box, and I convert that to HDMI or to USB and I run that. But now you're dealing with like 3 little signal conversions, which is just kind of from a design standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, that's kind of messy. It's also now 3 potential points of failure. We talked about you could do network video and just say, hey, I'm just going to pipe this in over NDI and run that straight to the computer and bring up applications that support that stream directly. Well, that's great, but what happens when that stops? Now I have to explain to someone how to re-enable that stream, or now we're dealing with network issues.
Call the network team.
We call the network team and have them come fix it. Or we are dealing with the idea of how we get that PC to live on potentially multiple networks, or are we dealing with NAT to get the traffic from one network to the next? Or it gets kind of clunky there too. Now, granted, I will say at the outset, I think that is absolutely the future. And I think 5 years from now, that is the solution. But the tools just aren't there yet.
I know. I really
and the final option is
I just
we can take a camera and we can just fire USB via an extender. Well, that's fine. But now if I'm doing multiple cameras, now I have to select in software. And that, again, it's clunky. So I want to throw this open to the panel here. Let's just hash this out. If I need to put 2 cameras in a classroom, what are those viable options to make this happen? Because
the worst option is USB. It's like, don't do that. You hit the nail on the head. Like I'm trying to stay away from going USB extenders because those give us problems. You have to power issues and all that shit. It's just terrible.
I think what really is really frustrating about this whole topic is that individually, it's easy. Mm-hmm. It's easy. It's easy for each of us individually,
and it's even easy.
Mm-hmm. It's even easy for most end users to do on their own with their own little world and infrastructure. It's simple because you learn one way to do it and you do it forever. When we have to put these into systems like we're doing, where you don't know, you don't always control the PCs, you don't always control the software, you don't always control the driver updates, you don't always control if the end user knows how to use the software. And so that's where it's all of the other shit that makes this really difficult. I can buy $200 worth of cheap action cameras, from Amazon and a cheap mono price push button switcher. And guess what? I've got 5 cameras and they go. Mm-hmm. And so now that's what really pisses everybody off. So let's try to figure out how we work around that.
But I think we do have to zoom out a tick here and kind of use our own little tool that we're working on outside. It's like what's the success here? Like, is it like getting just to the computer? Because, like you said, I can plug them in any different way we get there. But for me, if I was doing this, there's some criteria that I really need to meet. Like when I'm going to deploy a camera, we're going to jump off here and say it's a classroom, or, we're going to put 2 cameras in there. What do I have control over? What do I not have control over? And the very first piece for me when I did this exercise this past couple of years is I cannot provide power. At every location I'm going to add cameras to.
Good point.
So right there, like to me, that's if I have a solution, I need to power it first. How do I even do that? Right. And so so we're kind of looking at what infrastructure do you even have control over before you even decide how it's plugging into your computer at the end of the day? Like what needs to be there? And as a group, like what do we think the kind of what's the standard target we're looking at together? Like just 2 cameras, front, rear. How ultimately its destination is to show up in a computer. Is that what we're agreeing on?
I think let's for most people 1 camera is simple. Mm-hmm. You run whatever long cable you're going to run and you plug it in. Right.
You only have one option.
So let's say
on
2
the computer.
Two or more.
Okay.
2 or more. You have to.
Yeah, that's
switch.
a good point. That's really where it becomes that much more complex because of that switching and that converting and all that stuff. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't even care if it's PTZ. It's just two camera heads, 2 lenses, and I have to change between the 2 for whatever reason. Okay. So let's just call it that, 2 or more.
What's the preferred user experience to make the choice?
Well, yeah, that's exactly the question.
Right. So, I think that also like is going to talk about how we're going to transport and do this. Like, do we like the philosophy of like you choose this over here, you choose this over here? Right?
I've tried.
Are we trying to get to
ways.
a one-stop shop? True. Would the goal be one-stop shop?
It would be nice. I've tried multiple different ways, and I haven't got a good feel from any faculty on the ways we've put out there. Well, just change it in Zoom. Like, what? You can change cameras in Zoom. Like, I pick a camera in Zoom because they always they pick 1 camera. It's their webcam on their laptop. Throw 2 in there. Like, I don't know. I don't like this. And you do it on the touch panel.
Somehow they do it wrong.
They don't ever do it, or they forget about it because why are you switching to that second camera? Is it in the front of the room for the audience? So when a student asks a question, you're going to run over to the touch panel, hit a button. Okay, repeat your question against it. Like, no, that's not going to happen, right? What's the need of switching to 2 cameras?
Yeah.
Well, even beyond the need, it's the question of once we get to that point. So let's just assume we have a need for, as Jamie said, 2 or more. Because whether it's 2 or 1,000, it's the same issue.
Sometimes the need defines how you're going to switch it, right? Well, so you're thinking of like pressure mats or all kinds of shit.
For the sake of this discussion, we'll step past that and say we need 2. because that request has come in a number of times. So
yeah, and I've tried. I'm with you, Justin. I think we all have. I've tried multiple variations, and the most
they all
successful.
work.
Yeah, the most successful
work,
one
but-
I've had it in the meantime was because I've done the auto switching where whether it's let's say two instructors, it's either motion sensor or the step pads or whatever, right? Or if it's instructor students, then it's microphone triggered, and mileage may vary. Is a lot of times it's the instructor's preferences. What I've had the most luck with recently is that there's two buttons on the touch panel and or somewhere else. They could be even two physical buttons somewhere else in the room. And it says, look at me, look at them. Look at me, look at them. And I've gotten the most positive feedback from that because a lot of times it has an auto mode there, but a lot of times they only activate auto mode when it's an interactive class. Otherwise, they like the look at me, look at them, because they want to be, and they're willing to go out of their way to hit this secondary button, whatever it is. But to have camera one or instructor cam, it's like, look at me. I'm the teacher, look at me. And they're giant. I mean, I have two buttons on the whole screen, 3. One of them's mute, right? Look at them,
Jamie,
look at me, and mute.
Just to back up, when you say screen, are you talking touch panel with interface
touch
you've done,
panels.
or are you talking computer?
No, I do touch panels and have one stream into the computer for the simple reason of what we've all discovered with Zoom Rooms, Teams Rooms, Blue Jeans, you pick it, is sometimes it decides it just doesn't like your USB device, or it doesn't like the fact that you have two of them under the same name, or it didn't take your name, or there was an update and now that one no longer. So I just
sometimes your content goes in as a camera and then now you're all hosed on that.
Sometimes you're there. So I've just gotten to the point where, and this is just switching. It's just switching that there is some sort of automation there, not AI. I don't deploy the artificial intelligent tracking and switching. I use the old fashioned, let's do some gating auto mixers. Let's try to monitor. Let's see what's going on. Or I use motion sensors. I'll even use the ceiling microphones to move the camera for the instructor, even though it's not actually using the ceiling micro feed. It's using their wireless just so we know where they are in the room. But as far as switching is concerned, what the instructors in my programs that use this by themselves have found is that if they don't have a technician being the intelligence, they would much rather push that single button. Look at me, look at them. They would much rather have one button.
You're advocating for like a secondary camera infrastructure, pre-application computer kind of.
Yes.
So it's dedicated to doing this cause. You're bringing them back and then spinning them in to either a converter or whatever into your computer, correct? And we probably all around this, as it is right now, the moment we say 2 or more cameras, that's probably our threshold for doing that, in which we say yes. But now it's like, okay, well, what do you do when you're doing that? What does that infrastructure look like? What is the preference of that?
So, and this is where, again, I've over the last few years, I've run a bunch of these out. I think the future of it is all network based. I really do. Whether it's an NDI stream or an RTM, I always get them mixed up. A real time stream of some sort.
RTSP.
I do. Yeah, I do think that those are the futures. I think right now what really hangs it up is that the virtual webcam drivers are usually need admin privileges or some sort of extra step, or they're, like as Chris was saying earlier, they're on a separate network. So I have purposely chose cameras and spent, and a lot of times it's just a couple $100, $200 there, $300 here, to make sure that I have I'm using NDI, but also either HDMI or SDI. And I'll use fiber HDMIs and pull them back to wherever I need to go to some pre-switcher, whether it's a cheap mono price or Amazon piece of crap or expensive Blackmagic design. They're not expensive, but you get where
Sure. Yeah,
compared to $10 from Amazon,
yeah, exactly.
they're expensive. But I have it on the network because I do think that that's where we're going to end up becoming. And you'll just be able to ingest those streams directly. And or in my pharmacy program, I went completely NDI because I have 3 different campuses that these that teach. They have these little triangle courses. And I want to bypass Zoom and Teams altogether. I want to be able to take that camera feed, that NDI stream, even from the computer, an NDI stream, and blast it full bandwidth to these other locations and skip the conversion process.
No, yeah, absolutely.
And we're there. Technology's there. We've all read the articles. We all know what's out there. We've all seen, even during 2020, the recording studios were using Dante across the world, these massive Dante clocks in order to record still. So we know it can be done. Now, you're breaking that down into, will my network allow me? Do I have bandwidth to these different campuses? These are all question marks that need to be answered. So right now,
I think importantly,
those are my choices.
Upstream of this, when you look at products, let's start right there at that first spigot being the camera itself. Maybe it's PTZ, maybe it's not. How do you assess like the models that are useful for you to be able to deliver all these different pieces you said? Like I heard, like my own PoE is really important for me.
Yeah.
And if I can get SDI and HDMI
Before
to me.
Beyond
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say, would we all say PoE is required either just for control, but also for that power option? Because
To me, it is
mostly for power, just because
that
I want to
gets-
deal with an electrician.
We're starting there to say whatever we're doing here, it requires PoE.
Yes.
Turning it on that
Yes.
way.
And I think that even qualifies as not the network standard PoE, even that power over Ethernet cable, like Vadio, right? They have that extra cable that they run. Just power over Cat 6.
If nothing else, as an infrastructure play, I need to power that device from my centralized location, maybe not the centralized location, but mine. So you have a PoE to turn said thing on, and then what are our flavor of spigots that we want to see on these devices? Like mine is like I have a use for SDI, and I do have a use for HDMI. At one time I thought I needed USB, but I'm quickly moving away from that.
I would agree. And Justin said it earlier that USB, it works, but it's always like an added clunkiness.
It's a problem.
So,
yeah.
If it's part of the camera, for instance, PTZ Optics or Bird Dog, right? It's an add-on that's like a bonus when I need it, but it is not a requirement.
But I think
so it's
the
really
USB
nice
ones
to have.
weren't PoE at one point. Maybe they are now, but I don't.
Yeah, so like the Bird Dog, the P100 has the USB out, and it's PoE and SDI and HDMI, has all of it. And I think I've used the USB once, but boy, it was sure handy when I needed it.
So I guess
it's one of them things.
Let's go around the room here. So in kind of order of preference, is it SDI before HDMI or HDMI before SDI? And I want to throw
SDI first.
SDI first, okay.
Oh,
because if it's HDMI, I normally, not always, but normally would have to use some kind of conversion transmitter receiver again, and that goes back to the USB boxes. It's similar. It's like now I've got to power that, maybe not, but then it's it's just clunky.
So I interchange them. I use them both almost equally, but I do want to throw in the NDI. I think being able to make the unit NDI capable is important when we think about that piece itself.
And that's that $200 update or upgrade that I just go ahead and buy. So if I buy a Panasonic camera, I really like them. Most of them are NDI ready. That quote ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just go ahead and spend the $200. It's $200. I just go ahead and spend it. I spec it for NDI because I know 2 years from now I'm going to throw this thing on the network. If not in the room it's going in the room next door to it when I move that camera.
Okay. So those three decisions right there, the SDI, HDMI, and NDI are going to call out your infrastructure now, like what you're going to do to get from that camera to your common switching location. I don't bring SDI native into any of my teaching stations. The cable does, but I don't. It's not an input on a switcher ever. Right? I do not do that. I have done it in like larger scale pieces, but usually I'm converting it, and it was just about a play on cable type and labor installation. But I normally am not switching SDI native devices.
On that decision making process, it is there. I do want to put a little star by that USB. Is that for these Zoom rooms that we're building, the way the UI works and the back end, it wants to talk directly to the camera via USB to set presets. So if you're listening to this, you're like, oh, perfect. Well, I don't need USB to build my Zoom rooms. No.
I will
back the trailer up a little bit.
I'm gonna, and if you're listening Zoom, so what? I'm gonna remove Zoom Room from like the professional AV
stop building Zoom
conversation.
Well,
we're gonna move that to the side.
We need to be able to control cameras through Zoom rooms over Ethernet, and that's a Zoom problem. Yeah,
I see what
we
you're
should.
saying. Okay, I'm with you.
It's a Zoom problem.
Yeah,
I thought you said we and our current deployments need to be able to. You're saying we in general can't do this, but want to. And
if
Zoom
you can do it,
yet.
there might be a way to do it that we don't know about. Call
there's
me.
Talking. Jamie, I know you're closer to, or no, you're more up to speed on the NDI stuff. There's talk about Zoom integrating with the NDI API and things like that.
It's so
Teams
close.
Does, but it's not there yet. So maybe that's one of those magic sauce things when that happens, but it's not.
Yeah, both those products have been really funky. Microsoft, it has to be enabled at the super admin level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now you have to justify anyway. And it's a lot of outputs, not so much of ingest. These are my understandings because I can't get my super admin to actually do it. The Zoom, they just bought that company that allows you to do these things. And it'd be wonderful. Ideally, you just put the virtual driver on the damn machine and off it goes. Just like OBS, which is free.
Exactly. OBS can do it. Zoom should do it.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, that's the way it works. As I said just a few minutes ago, I'm trying to bypass them all altogether.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going out of my way not to give them any more of my money. So, but that's not here yet.
But I think they're clever player in the field right now. The SMPTE 2110 thing, right? And this model, and starting to see in this broadcast trickle down. And my guess is we're going to see this kind of stuff. It's like you can do full on broadcast switchers that are like don't even have baseband inputs on them anymore. Right? Mm-hmm. And so what we're looking for is like if you're going to leverage that pure network play, the ability to switch that not at the computer level, but upstream of that at another appliance somewhere else, right? Would be kind of the perfect controlled environment. Or would you say bring it in and just let me choose it still? And then then you got to make that choice again. Am I doing a touch panel? Am I doing it from the application layer?
So in my pharmacy installation, I have a technical booth down the hall.
Storage closet for all the old gear you don't want to surplus yet?
Well, it's for the classroom technicians that I gave them a suite of software and hardware, OBS or vMix, and actual analog fader bars and things so that they could produce if they needed to. But one of the things that we struggled with was that, to answer your question, is it direct software ingest? Just pull it right off the network and ingest it into there? Or is it outside of that? I have a mixture of both. One of them is bandwidth dependent. And it's something that's very important. Most of these computers have the gigabit input port, right? Mm-hmm. And so, if you're running NDI at 1080p or 120 megs per second, so you get around 6 or 7 of those, and you start really bogging down that network port because you're also doing other network things. There's other overhead in there. So you really have to pay attention to that. So ingesting and then sending it out becomes a problem because you might have 6 coming in and 2 going out, and now you're over your gig. So what do? You can't put an extra NIC in there. Anyway, make sure you do your math, your bandwidth math. What I ended up doing was use decoders. And I've used these in several other places as well. The NDI to HDMI or SDI decoders. There's several of them out there. KiloView. I haven't used that one, but you have, Mark.
Yeah.
The Magwell has a couple, and Bird Dog has their little mini. They're all basically the same price point, right around that $500 mark, which isn't terrible. They all have an API. They all do the switching right there. So I can send from I use Extron, or I've also used QSC to do this as well. I can send that decoder the switching and say, switch from stream 1 to stream 2. Mm-hmm. It then converts to HDMI, goes right into the computer, right? It's boom, we're there. And it's an API. I can write that. I can control that from the control system. The other thing I really like about it is it gives me, sometimes with computers, when they change their names, it changes the NDI stream.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need a very repeatable network where you don't want to go in there and reconnect it all the time, you need to know that that computer stream is always going to be Chris's NDI camera number 1 all the time, every time. Not today was Chris's, but he changed the name of his machine because he was being funny and it's Poopy Head stream. Well, now it's not going to show up on the other side. And
so that's,
you have to be very
that's the
cognizant of
decoder that handles that information, right? I mean,
the decoder is basically subscribing to streams.
Yes.
And then converting them out to baseband video again.
Yes, but if you're using a computer,
still needs to be converted.
It still needs to be converted. Yes.
Okay.
It still needs to be converted. Right now, it's a little messy on the end, as Chris was pointing out earlier.
But I think the model
now,
you just described,
you still got to pull it off.
It's the bridge, because I think you're at a common infrastructure type now, right? But so to me, we kind of fast forwarded here to kind of like what I think we're all going to get towards. But I think there's probably folks out there who are like, well, what if I'm going to do HDMI, right? What if I didn't do NDI? I'm not there yet, because
that's a good point. So earlier on, and before we got a little derailed on the NDI, we said SDI or HDMI are really your two options for baseband video.
Yes.
Yes, there's HD base T, and I get that, but a lot of those then still get broken out on that, or you can do HD base T based into your switcher. I get it.
Yeah.
That's clunky too. We probably need to talk about that. Are we adding ports to a central switcher that we're already using for presentation systems, or are we keeping it completely separate, even if it means I have a secondary little switcher there, because maybe that's cleaner because that's part of the camera system.
This is where I think it's going to break. People are going to have different philosophies.
People have different philosophies.
Because I would say on the outset, from a design and engineering standpoint, I like the concept of everything goes into one switcher. However, now I'm burning inputs on that switcher for that, and I don't want that. Means bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger switches, and I don't want to deal with that. So
to me, it's like what do you have in your lectern right now, and that could be the deciding factor based upon budget. Where if you have a 8x8 and you got 2-3 open card slots, that was probably over designed to begin with. But let's go ahead and use that because that's cheap right now because I already have all this infrastructure. But then there's also
that frame may not be like the cards are the expensive part of that frame. Like it's the I and the O becomes more expensive, and like by the time you do that, I think there's more cost effective ways to do it.
Maybe so. I don't know.
So yes, that's been my evolution. Right, I used to make sure it had HDMI, and I would buy fiber HDMI cables, which are not always cheap, and sometimes the little electronics in the ends die, so now you got to buy another one.
That's why I stay away from HDMI.
Careless installs. But anyway, I would take it into, we have cross points in all of our things. And I always had extra inputs anyway. It didn't matter to me. Hey, extra inputs.
Oh.
I would put it in there and then take one of the matrixed outs because it was already extra and run in the PC. My problem, what really irritated the crap out of me was that HDMI is really hard to frame lock. And when it handshakes, when you start switching from one to the other, when it starts handshaking, sometimes you get the drops and you get the comebacks, and sometimes it blinkies, sometimes you get the static, and that was really distracting to if the instructor saw that for one reason or another, it was really distracting. They didn't like it.
Yeah.
I also liked doing it that way because that same output, I would try to have a loop through device like for my capture card so that it could go to a little monitor, little confidence monitor right there on the desk, one of the little 7-inch deals. And then that thing would flip out, right? And then people get upset because, so I quit. I quit doing it. Now I do go ahead and put SDI, even the dumbest, cheapest SDI switcher, the frame switching, even when it's not clock synced, is still so close that most people don't even realize it.
Do you get the ones that are so cheap they don't even have a brand name on them? They're just a black box and it says SDI.
I'll tell you, I get them from Monoprice. They have a 4x1 SDI with a serial port on it. And the serial code is 1 line feed, 2 line feed.
And it works.
And I might miss a frame or two, right? You can tell that there's a glitch in the switch, but not like HDMI. It's worth the expense to me just to put the SDI in there. So I've kind of gone through all of these iterations and found out that what I thought was the easiest ended up not being the best.
So I think the scenario you just described is like what we would say is the most akin to our distance education proper room, right? Where like we once had these like monitors and we had the cameras and to and fro, but we're moving that into self-service, right? So, and that was its own backbone of infrastructure doing it. It came out of SDI, but now I'm moving it over. Same part that I use everywhere else where I use SDI, I still use that HDMI, and I do think of that transport as its own layer in the room. I'm not piggybacking on presentation switchers that are in the room already because I can't afford to add extra inputs there, and the pressure is to reduce costs, not add costs, because I want to bring cameras in. So in those type of environments, and I hate to say this, but the infrastructure looks a whole hell of a almost lot like the old Cisco infrastructure, where I have this like camera switcher thing now in here, right? And I am using, I'll be guilty, I've called out some of these like new DM light lines with HD base T HDMI transmitters, power them back there, and just HDMI right into that. I do have a separate run. I'm still powering my camera via PoE, but I'm now taking the HDMI out into my transmitter, bringing it back to a smaller HD base T switcher that's sole purpose in life is just my camera switch. That's all it does. And then it dumps into a converter into my computer, right? So, and I'm doing that off a centralized touch panel. So similar to you, it's student or instructor view. But that's kind of it. I don't want to add extra frame input capacity because I can't carry that around. And I don't want to. I'm trying to get rid of those large scale frames across campus wherever possible.
And that's where I started getting into. So a frame card is, let's call it $400. Fair enough. Is it
sure?
Frame card $400? Well, I
Well,
can
frame
get
card
that
for what?
Like a video matrix.
Well, I'm trying. Yes, for a matrix switcher of some sort.
Between $400 and $800 is somewhere in there depending.
Well,
on
I'm just let's say I'm just
split the
throwing a
difference.
number out,
$600,
right?
I would not be comfortable with 400.
400.
I'd say start at 800 if you want to start budgeting that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now you're blowing
know
the entire budget on that stuff. So you're already kind of losing me. I'm like, I'm not even going that way. But go ahead.
Well, no, but that's where I'm headed, right? Is like when you have to do that, and that's $800 for just an input or an output. Okay, so now $1,600. Well, we talked a couple of weeks ago about my novel use of the ATM switcher from Blackmagic Design. It's $500.
Yep.
And yes, it is a secondary device. It is that extra widget. Yes, I already talked about how I'd rather use NDI everywhere, but I'll tell you what, having that extra outboard switcher, it just kind of helps clean things up. And when you do something like that ATM switcher or a not mono price special where it actually gen locks the video, now everything is seamless. You get that. We talk about all the time that people expect that influencer, that YouTube like experience. How can I get that kind of fancy stuff? Well, now you get closer to that. You get closer to, we can give you good quality, but now can we give you the switching? And so that's why I started separating it off. It was an evolution. And I guess I didn't realize how much of an evolution I've done over the last few years. This was pre-pandemic even. But I've done a lot. I've evolved from one end to the other, and all the things I tried to avoid at the beginning, RG6. I tried to avoid it. Like, well, who's going to use RG6 anymore? Oh yeah, me. Now I'm ordering it by the 1,000 feet again. It's not all that expensive. It's easy to terminate.
It's easier to pull.
It's the same size.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't have to deal with the fiber anymore. Like I like fiber HDMIs. I have really good luck with them until I don't. And then
then it's a problem.
How do you pull when you pull it through a floor box? You get it the first time, you can't get the second one.
There's a bunch of old broadcast guys out there saying, I told you why we need to escape.
Yeah, I know, right?
There's also RG6. I mean, just from a standpoint of just the cable infrastructure itself, will support multi-gigabit transfer.
Yeah.
So you're still leveraging stuff for the future down the road. So it's the same thing with CAT years ago when we started talking about going to dedicated standard space twisted pair stuff. It's like at the end of the day, I re-terminate the ends and put a different transmitter receiver pair or encoder decoder pair or whatever, but the cable pathway is still good and will support. The crazy thing is, I mean, I'll have network guys talk about, well, that won't quite do 10 gig. I was like, yeah, in a standard space Ethernet deployment, over dedicated baseband stuff, I can push 18 gig down that all day long.
Get wild,
so,
yeah. I think in a lot of my smaller spaces where I have full control from the camera to the rack, I'll put in the SDI. And even though I'm speccing NDI network-based video on all my cameras, I will still pull that. I'll power it from the network PoE, but I'll still pull SDI.
Well, I like that concept of
I
I have the network cable there already. It's just doing power and maybe control right now. But like you said, hey, the camera's capable, the system's capable. In a couple of years, when all these little last inch issues have been worked out, I can just stop using the SDI run
and stop using Zoom rooms. And there's a use case that we haven't talked about with NDI that almost came up on our campus during the pandemic. And I see this use case being used, widely used across our campus because our campus is pushing in-person learning. So how many times would it have been nice over the last 5 years, let's say, even pre-pandemic, to say this classroom we're going to bring in as a guest speaker to this other class because there's a lot of cross-pollination. So now all you have to do is if you had that last inch, that last few, miles, whatever you want to call it on this roadmap, where you can just flip a switch or change a setting really quick to bring in audio and video through NDI from multiple classrooms to this one classroom on campus. And that's super powerful. No applications, money and all this stuff going out to all these Zoom rooms and Teams rooms.
That overflow scenario a lot easier, even where you don't have what you think you'd have, right?
Right.
And I've also, it's all, based upon, again, if you're going to think about the network thing, bandwidth, do your math because it'll screw you in a hurry.
I would say have your own network, not the network, if you're going to be leveraging that type of stuff. Not to say you cannot do it, but you better have a real good relationship with your network team.
Well, but even with, my example of the computer earlier, don't think you're just going to be streaming 18 cameras into this Zoom computer and you're going to be careful because you will eat up a gigabit NIC in a hurry. So just do that math ahead of time and make sure you know. But it gets me out of a lot of binds too. If I have to go through a floor box now, I don't deal with coax, but I have to be very on purpose about what switch is put into the podium, or how many streams I'm sending down that single line. So just it's. Boy, we're on the precipice of this being really cool.
It's right there.
And I think for AV people,
it's there in broadcast. It's there in broadcast right now. It's only a matter of time until we're going to see it here. And so it's.
And I think that's why
yourself.
My beginning comments of this, what really pisses me off is that we all know that this is actually easy.
Yeah,
this is simple
we can do
and powerful and wonderful, except that we can't control some of these other things that really hamper multi-camera installations.
All right, so let me try to boil all this down here. I've been taking notes as we've been going, and we've been doing this for like 30 minutes. So, it sounds like we all agree. Whatever we're just talking. Okay, I'm doing multiple cameras in a space. Doesn't matter why. Multiple cameras in space. They have to get to a PC. That's where we're starting. I have an AV system of other things in there. These cameras are not going to touch that AV system. We're going to keep it separate, because then it's easier to maintain control, whatever, or if I need to swap out parts or whatever, but I'm not burning up inputs on the card. I don't have the bigger switchers, whatever that issue is. I'm keeping that separate. The cameras are going to be PoE powered, and PoE for control. Ideally, cameras that have NDI, because we're building for the future. So like you said, Jamie, if I'm going to spend the $200 now, if I'm buying a $2,000 camera or a $1,500 camera, $200 as an add-on is not a hard sell at that point. And it's already there. So 5 years from now, hey, it's
something that can fall into that SRT realm, that H.264 realm.
Something
right. Okay, yeah. Today it's NDI, but yes, any sort of network-based transport stream capability. If it's an add-on, make sure the camera supports it now, because otherwise you'll find all these cool things. We talked about the software switching and overflow and all that. But if that's something like, I got to go replace all my cameras now to do that. So yeah, I should have spent the extra $200. So look for that. The last question then, or the last 2 points then, is the switching. And it sounds like we'll do an outboard switch, a small little outboard switch. And it sounds like transport-wise, it's probably maybe safest or easiest standards-wise to do RG6 SDI transport to a small SDI switch. Make sure that switch does the clocking so we don't lose the frames and that sort of thing. But that's relatively straightforward. That switch, many of which they're not terribly expensive, and they can be controlled by your same control system. Run those 232 ports, which I find somewhat interesting that years ago we were always looking for more 232 ports. Now, as more things have moved to network control, we now generally have open 232 ports on our control processor. So run a little jumper down there. I can control that switch. I'm doing it outboard. And then out of that switch, I have a single USB encoder, which then dumps it into the computer. Does that that last little 3-minute thing, does that boil down as of February 4th, 2022?
It'll get you
the
there.
best option for I need to go deploy 100 rooms and this is how I'm going to do it.
Unfortunately, yes.
Without giving you specific details of every little knick-knack in that chain,
It will get you there.
That is the roadmap that you should be looking at, yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
It's easy.
Once NDI becomes, see, my problem, the biggest problem with NDI is not all the bandwidth and all that. It's just, when we talk about, it's easy because it's in production. Well, it's minds like us, right? We know how to manipulate NDI and make it work. We're putting it in front of a faculty. We need that control and manipulation to, be
as soon as you say open this or open that, you lost it.
Yeah, you can't do it.
Done.
You can't do it.
They can't have to open something.
Go to the advanced menu, click stream.
Nope,
Yeah,
gone.
done.
Right click the system
Missed
tray,
it. I don't even know
bring
what a right click
the
is.
webcam input up, go here,
I
move
don't
your
know if
mouse
it's fair
there.
to say they don't know what that is as much as, look, they're there to teach their physics class or history
They
class.
don't
or
wanna
whatever.
do
They
that.
don't want to have to deal with that.
No.
And if we cannot
they
put
shouldn't
together a
have to.
system, correct, exactly. If we can't put together a system that can do or that can operate without them needing to do that stuff, then yeah, I don't want that there. Now you're right, Mark. In production right now, you can do all this because the people running production are trained technicians and engineers who will go in and dink around and get it all set up and they're ready to go and it's showtime and it works awesome. And if they do configurations on the fly, they can. But someone who just wants to walk into a space, hit 3 buttons and teach their active learning class in humanities or whatever it is that day, they don't want to deal with all this stuff. So
They don't want to right click.
Nope. Don't make me.
Right clicking is bad for faculty.
So in our last, I'd say last 30 seconds of this giant camera conversation, are there any other points we did not cover that we need to make sure we bring up?
No, I mean, not in camera transport. I mean, there's all kinds of other
specific to
homework.
cameras.
But
So
I really hope
solving the world's
that
problems.
this helps because we hear about these questions a lot, or we spend a lot of time even internally talking about it. So I hope
mainly because I keep
voicing
asking the
this
same
out
damn
there.
questions different ways.
The funny thing about this is like when we go back to 2 years ago and we asked when we did our response plans, I pulled in video for all my cameras because it was available and all those cameras were available. And here we are talking about doing broadcast technology because it's quicker and easier.
That is an excellent point, Mark. I would say even, so you're talking right at the beginning of the pandemic when it was like, get what you can get.
Yep.
And now we're dealing with a similar thing with supply chain stuff is I want this, but I can't. And a lot of people still, and they go to like, I'm going to buy USB cameras everywhere. No, they're
Good God.
freaking terrible. Stop doing that. Those of you listening right now, get the SDI model that is powered by a PoE and supports NDI, and you'll probably find they're more available and you can get them everywhere. And they ship
And you're
tomorrow.
going to be able
sort
to
of
do
thing.
some cool shit in the future with that.
And then
Well,
you're
and I-
building for the future. Good point.
I think it's usually not that much more expensive to give
No, it's
yourself the
not.
flexibility to do something different.
Well,
And so usually it's more expensive when you start buying them in multiples, but $150 to get that extra coax port or BNC port
I like
is
how that
usually
price has
worth
dropped
it.
over the show. It was $250, then
Right.
$200, now it's $150.
Well,
Stick around.
yeah,
Well, that's
you're
for
doing-
NDI.
After the next
NDI
break, that
is
show
200,
will,
but
after the next break, that price will be $50.
To your point,
even
Jamie,
with-
if you buy a USB PTZ camera and you use 2 of them, and then you add the USB transport on top of that, you're better off financially spending the money on 2 PTZ optics or some other camera that has NDI and SDI because it's about the same price, and it
It's
might be
more
even
robust.
cheaper.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would trust it a whole hell of a lot longer.
give yourself the ability to take this camera and wherever you put it, you have an option to make it work. That's what I look for. And I think that's what we discussed today.
And I will say one of the frustrations I have when I got here, there were, I got here about 6 months ago, and there was a bunch of gear purchased with CARES funds. And again, it was what was available at the time. And a lot of it are USB only PTZ cameras.
And
But
we
that
haven't even
means
brought up. Go
all
ahead.
the things we talked about as far as power and that sort of thing. So my charge is to give those away to people on campus, but I can't because many of them I say, I will give you this $1,500 camera. You have to pay to have an outlet put in, or we have to find some way to transport power. So it doesn't work. So I have a bunch that I'm finally down to my last 2 that I have places where I can give them away because it's appropriate or they're willing to pay for it. But it adds that extra layer of, we didn't think about that because that's what was available at the time. So it's basically, it's USB, just plug it in, but we're trying to transport it. We need power, all these issues It could have been absolved had they bought something different, but anyway, that's water under the bridge.
And some of these USB cameras are coming with USB-C with a USB-C to USB 2.0 cable, and they're eventually going to stop providing that adapter. And guess what? Your USB-C transports are not only wackadoo, but they're also a little bit more expensive than 2.0. So now you've got that issue to deal with if you are speccing USB cameras.
USB-C is its own problem. We'll cover that in a future thing. In the meantime, we need to take a quick break here so Mark can dump this recording before his computer explodes.
Whoa.
As many of you know, the Super Friends have always been better received when we have more input from you. So, here's your chance. Send us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and get involved with the show. We're looking for some topics to discuss, some fellow nerds to talk to, or just general AV awesomeness to brag about. But remember, we'll probably steal your ideas. And I suppose we'd take some criticism, but that wouldn't be very nice. Anyway, drop us a note at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com and find out how quickly we ask you to join this nonsense.
All right, so for our final segment today, we've been talking about this for a few months and decided, we need to create kind of our own Hall of Fame, our own award for products that have just, there are things out there that if you need a certain type of product, there's a couple that come to mind, and this is going to work all day long, every day. And often, if you look at these are products that have been around for years, if not decades. That there is no question how well they operate, how well they're going to operate for years on end. And I don't think we really have a segment title for this. Maybe we're just calling it our Hall of Fame.
Yeah, the AVSF Hall of Fame. Things that you would bet your AV life on.
Things you could rely on. If you need to have something work for you in a clutch scenario, it's going to be this one. So how do we want to approach this? Because we know what our first one is, and everyone knows what it is. And
this is going to be an ongoing segment. We're not going to get through all of them today. We're only going to give it like one today. I want you to think about these, and if people have ideas for this, things that are rock solid, we want to hear about it too. Send them in to us because I think it's important. But we're going to kick it off today with a kind of one that we agreed about with this week that we felt like.
I forgot to run our little intro here too.
So fire it up. Let's start the award show. This is our first ever AVSF award that is tried and true hardware that you can trust. And I think we all agree that this thing is probably
pretty sure it's this button. Let's find out here.
Let's hear it. Fire it up, Chris.
Yeah, but what is that? It's a major award. Shucks, I wouldn't have known, Dad. It looks like a lamp.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a lamp, you nincompoop. But it's a major award. I want it. Damn, hell, you say you want it? Yeah. Have mind power, sweet, mind power.
The AVSF AV Hall of Fame. That's what this is.
The AV Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Somebody else has that.
The thing where if you went to a garage sale and found it, you would be excited.
Yes.
Like, all right, so
without further ado, what is our first universally accepted nomination into our Hall of Fame for AV crap?
Jamie, open the envelope. Tell us what it is.
It's a microphone. Usually with a black body made out of aluminum and a circular grill that will roll off any flat surface you put it on.
And you can use it as a hammer.
It works as a hammer.
Or
it's
a saw.
Purpose. Yeah.
You can also use it as a nail.
Yeah.
Then the Shure SM58.
That's right.
Tried and true to rock and roll, swinging around your head, banging off the drum, and still sing all night long.
And it's the same price as of.
It's never changed.
It never changed price for 10 years. Still $99 everywhere.
I think that
somehow
anybody is listening to this,
nothing. Yeah.
If you disagree that the SM58 or some of its close cousins is not one of
wait.
There's a caveat.
We do have a bad cousin. We have a
black sheep. Some of its close cousins.
There's a derivative.
Some of its close cousins.
Hold on.
We need to say this is the SM58 only.
Only, yes. Because that son of a bitch with the switch on it does not count for this. It does not get any part of this award. Not having it. Nothing
you have
worse
said
than
that multiple times.
Yes.
What's your problem with the switch?
Any switch, it's 50% wrong. And yes, I know you can lock it off, yada, 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 but when I've had those, when people, I don't know how many times I've seen stages that have them, and it's off, and they're fumbling with trying to turn it back on or whatever it is, like, no. So you can't have an additive, potentially wrong solution added into the device itself. So the switch, it has a moving part. So my criteria, no moving parts outside of the main element itself. So the switch one, you're not getting in.
So is that your concern? It's a moving part that will eventually fail, or that people will walk up there with it off?
Both.
And not reel it?
Both of those scenarios happen. Yes.
I've also seen them put off in the off position on the mic clip, so you didn't even know it had a switch.
Right.
Oh, under the clip itself. Yeah. Okay, I'm with you.
So so that one, sorry, better luck next time. You have to wait another year for voting, but you're not getting in switched SM58.
So the SM58.
Also, spoiler, it's not getting in next year either.
So. Exactly. So don't even bother. But yeah, so
so those of you who have purchased a whole bunch of SM58s and found they were cheaper because it was the SM58S with the switch. Sorry.
Not just a quick little anecdote to this. We did a shootout with this. We had a studio here on campus, and people were like, we think we got to buy better microphones. So we had the same person read the exact same text multiple times and gave them those files, and unanimously, the SM58 was the microphone that they preferred to hear. So over much more expensive microphones, they all like the curve. So take it. Get them.
There you go. So if you need a mic, SM58. Also, if you need a hammer, SM58. If you need
a snack,
if you need a snack, SM58. If you need to fend off people who are trying to rob your truck as you are loading out from a show, SM58. If you need to throw one of those into the audience to make sure that you get that person who seems to have some sort of weapon in their hands, SM58.
If you need one of those blocks that you put behind your trailer so it doesn't roll into the weight.
If you're setting up for a show and your trailer is not chalked properly, SM58.
That would work.
If you are running short on funds setting up for your show and need to go into a 7-Eleven and get some extra money from the cashier, SM58.
If you don't like it,
we're out of time,
put it on Twitter. If you don't like it, put it on Twitter. We want to know why you don't like it.
Well, we've managed to ruin yet another episode of AV SuperFriends Off the Rails. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. If you complain loud enough, we might just invite you on the show.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV SuperFriends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.